everybody, and welcome to Parks Bros, or should I say Movie Bros? Apparently, a lot of you guys actually wanted me to do a movie review for Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm completely surprised by that, not gonna lie, but let's jump into it. So Bohemian Rhapsody chronicles the story of Freddie Mercury and Queen from 1970 to 1985 at Live Aid. Now, before we get started, I would actually say I am a pretty huge Queen fan. I've been listening to Queen since about first grade or so, maybe even second grade, and I've just grown up with them my entire life. I have every album they have ever made in my possession. I have multiple vinyls. I think I only have vinyls of the game Queen 2, Day at the Races, which is my personal favorite album. And I have CDs of every album up to A Kind of Magic in 1986. And then, of course, I have the iTunes to every single one of those albums. So I've just always grown up with Queen music, and I've seen Queen plus Adam Lambert twice now, and I can't wait to see them hopefully in the next couple years again. It would be amazing if I could, but I love Queen's music. I've always grown up with them, and that's kind of why I'm so excited to do this review and to actually see the movie. For this first half, I will not have any spoilers, and I will warn you when I will start spoiling things, just to let you guys know. Now, the first thing I have to talk about is the performances in this film. I think Rami Malek deserves an Oscar nomination for playing Freddie Mercury. He did an amazing job captivating the audience in the theater just by his performance alone. It was fantastic what he was able to do to bring Freddie back to life almost to a point. He really embodied that larger-than-life character for a good majority of the film and just pulled it off better than anyone I could think of, actually, at this moment in time. He got all the body movements correct and all the speech patterns pretty perfect as well. Just fantastic job by Rami. I applaud you, sir. Now, another performance that I have to bring up is actually Willem Lee, who played Brian May. He did a fantastic job as well. He was probably the most completely accurate to anyone in the band, at least look-wise and just physically. He was the most accurate, I would say. I mean, if you put two photos next to Brian May and Willem Lee, at least in his outfit for the movie, you would not really be able to tell the difference if you didn't know Queen extremely well. I mean, Willem pulled off a fantastic performance as Brian, and it was kind of crazy. It looked like we were watching a young Brian May for a lot of the movie as well. Another person I have to say great job to is Lucy Boynton, who played Mary Austin, who was Freddie's best friend for a good chunk of his life, and is probably the closest person to Freddie in general. And I think Lucy did a fantastic job, especially in the scenes involving her and Rami. They just did a great job. They fed off of each other so well that I really enjoyed watching them both in the same scenes. They really had a great chemistry on screen. Now, I have to mention, of course, Joe Mantello, I think, is that how you say his name? And Ben Hardy, who played John Deacon and Roger Taylor, respectively. I think they both did fantastic jobs as well. One complaint I do have is I wish that I saw the other band members more in the movie. I know this movie is supposed to be mainly about Freddie, but I would have loved to see more interaction from the band itself. I do think cast-wise, this is probably the best overall cast performance I've seen in a very long time. All around, it was a really great job by casting for each and every single one of those actors on screen. They just all did a great and fantastic job. Now, on to something else I loved was the cinematography. I loved the way this film looked. It was beautiful. There were some great moments, especially between Freddie and Mary, and some of their scenes. Just the cinematography was fantastic, but it just looked amazing. just looking at some of the little tricks that they pulled off to change your focus on certain people in certain areas of the screen, it was just really, really well done. And it was something I noticed very early on in the film, and that just kept getting better and better throughout the film going on. Now, as a movie as a whole, I do think they cut it a little short. I would have liked to see maybe another 20 to 15 minutes just for some more building of relationships, especially between some certain characters that never really get a full introduction like some of these characters should. And another thing that I want to add before we get to the spoiler section is that I feel like this was definitely rushed. Especially in the beginning of the film, it definitely seems like the pacing is just a little too quick for what it's trying to convey, and I think if they added another 15 minutes there, especially in the beginning of the film, it would have worked out much better, instead of kind of just a slow rise all the way throughout the movie to reach an amazing climax, of course, but it definitely started off a little too quick for my liking, especially for most of the characters. Now let's move on to the spoiler portion, and let's get to some spoilers. One thing I did not like at all, which I was actually just talking about, is the beginning of the film. I believe that the beginning of the film really needed some more backstory. They kind of just shoved the characters in there and then said they were all introduced to each other on one night, which is not even close to true. And this is the first scene that you actually see 3 of the band members together, and that being Freddie, Brian, and Roger, where Freddie introduces himself after Tim Staffel, the original bassist and singer for Smile, the original band before Queen was founded, quit. So it just didn't really fit my liking, because I know that Freddie was actually pretty good friends with some of the band members. Before then, he was actually very good friends with Tim Staffel at the time, and knew Brian and Roger. And also, the introduction of Mary is right before he goes up to Brian and Roger for the first time in the film, and he actually knew Mary through Brian May, oddly enough. So it just kind of made me a little sad that they rushed that entrance and that opening of these main characters for the film. It just didn't make too much sense to me. And I get that they were trying to keep it at a nice length that wasn't too long, but I think they could have added another 10 to 15 minutes just introducing their relationships there, because I feel like one thing in the movie that was not the best was the actual relationships between characters. We see that a lot of these characters are very tight and see themselves as almost a family, but I feel like it's not conveyed enough in the beginning, in the first act, enough to actually show that we should care completely about their relationship, besides being like, oh yeah, they're in the band too, that's cool. Now I want to talk about something that a lot of people have discussed online with reviews and things, and saying that Freddie's sexuality wasn't explored as much as they would have liked. And I think I disagree. I think it was respectful, and it actually showed more than I was expecting, especially with multiple different partners in the movie, and interesting sequences involving New York City in particular in like these fade in, fade out sections of the film. And I thought it was respectful for the most part, and it showed realistically enough to show what was actually going on. And I think it was the best way they could have gone throughout it without going to full-on nitty-gritty R. So I quite enjoyed that they were respectful in that aspect of the film. But I also want to talk about probably one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen put to the big screen. It's just the most conveying scene I've seen in a long time between 2 performers, and that is Lucy Boynton and Rami Malek playing Freddie Mercury and Mary Austin. It is a scene in which Freddie goes to the TV showing off Love of My Life being sung in Rio, at Rock in Rio, by the fans. Not himself. He doesn't even get to the microphone before the fans start singing. And he goes to Mary and says, they're all singing to you. And this is pretty much a coming out scene in which Freddie declares that he thinks he's bi. But Mary immediately knows that that's probably not the truth, and kind of calls him out about that. And just this scene almost brought me to tears, just the way that the message is being conveyed between their two expressions, and just with Love of My Life being sung by supposedly thousands and hundreds of thousands of people on the TV, and just this beautiful connection between the three, with the music playing in the background, but also this juxtaposition of their trust between each other kind of breaking a little bit. And I think it was just a fantastically done scene, especially cinematography-wise, just getting some really nice close-up shots of their faces and really seeing the emotion in each other's eyes. I just adored that scene to bits. And it really just showed the connection the two of these actors had on screen. Now let's move on to something I didn't quite like the best. I get why they were doing it, but it didn't make too much sense to me personally, and that is the "We Will Rock You" scene. And it's honestly just this scene in particular that kind of was like, you could have changed that, honestly. At least with placement in the film. And in the film, it takes place in 1980 when Brian's writing "We Will Rock You," but that's just not the case. "We Will Rock You" actually debuted in 1977 on News of the World, so that kind of irked me a little bit, just seeing the timeline changed. Now, that's something that happens a lot through this film. The timeline gets shuffled around quite a bit, but other points in the film I was not too irked by it, but just this one scene in particular was just like, you could have probably moved that. Because, honestly, this is the only scene that was time jumped that just didn't have to be. Now, of course, you end up getting towards the end of the film, and Paul, who's kind of the main antagonist, is taking control, per the movie, of Freddie, and just not taking calls for Live Aid, and just pointing him in the wrong direction completely. You see Aidan Gillen get fired as manager, who also did a great job, I feel. And Lee actually was sitting next to me, my buddy, and he looks over and he's like, "Does Paul die in this?" And I'm like, "No, not that I know of." But it just shows Paul, I don't remember the actor's name at the moment in time, but he did a fantastic job being the main antagonist and just being that kind of evil guy that's trying to take advantage of your main protagonist, being Freddie Mercury. But this leads into Freddie eventually finding out that he has been diagnosed with AIDS, but this actually in real life did not occur until about a year and a half or almost 2 years later that he found out. So not the most accurate thing, but it raises the stakes for this final climactic ending, and that is Live Aid. Oh my goodness, probably the best third act I've ever witnessed in a movie, besides probably Return of the King. It was just a really well done set of 15 to almost 20 minutes. It just was so well done. Looking back at the actual Live Aid performance, like I've done, I don't know, countless amounts of times, you could tell that they got every spot pretty much perfect. Except for there was one thing, like with the microphone stand, it was like 3 inches off, but whatever, you know. But it was just so well done and moving, and it sounded great. You could tell that they actually took from the main Live Aid performance and remixed it in a way, probably using Mark Martell's voice for parts of it, and Mark, of course, does an amazing job anyways, but it sounded like Live Aid almost to a T. It was incredible, the work that they did. And even at one point, I looked over and there were a couple people even clapping along to Radio Gaga and stomping their feet with "We Will Rock You" eventually in the film. It just shows that Queen has this staying power. Haha, if you get that reference, I love you. But they just really have this ability to jump generations musically. And I have not met one person that doesn't know what Bohemian Rhapsody is. Or "We Will Rock You." Everyone knows "We Will Rock You." At least at some point in their life they've done it. It's amazing to see how many people really connect with their music, and you can even see it through the film, because there were people singing in the theater, there were people clapping along in the theater, except for probably "Doing All Right" was the only song that no one was like, "Huh? I love this song." Except for me. I was probably the only one in the theater that was saying that, at least to my knowledge. But I thought this film was fantastic. I loved it to bits. It does kind of play to the cliches and tropes of a biopic. Yes, of course it does, because that's pretty much the way Queen's story went, especially from 1970 to 1985. Started as no one's and made their way slowly up to the top through multiple different hits, and then hit some bumps along the way, and then triumphantly come back. Yeah, I know it's the cliches and the tropes of a regular biopic, but it's what happened. And I mean, you can't change history that much, which I do think they took some liberties with changing history, but they kept the storyline mainly the same, so I am appreciative of that, and I'm glad it ended at Live Aid. I really think I am, because I think ending in 1991 with Freddie's death would have just been absolutely heart-wrenching. Now, if they make a sequel, there you go, but that would just be the saddest movie to watch, and it would be just really hard to watch. As well as I don't think many people would want to see Queen slowly fade away from 1986 to 1991. I mean, you could start off with Wembley and their Wembley performances, or Nebworth Park, but then it's just all kind of downhill from there, especially with Freddie slowly deteriorating with AIDS. So I'm glad they ended it with Live Aid. My one little iffy thing about the ending of the film was right as it's starting to fade to black, you hear an a cappella version of Freddie singing Don't Stop Me Now. Now, I don't know if this was the best song choice to do that, just because it kind of took the mood from, this was amazing, this is absolutely fantastic, I love this film, it was uplifting in the end, and then all of a sudden, Don't Stop Me Now, it's like, especially with the a cappella, it just brings it right back down to earth really quickly, and I think that they could have kept it going for at least another 30 seconds there. And I know they're trying to say that Freddie passed away eventually, and then they started the Phoenix Mercury Trust, but it did kill the mood very, very quickly at that point in the film. But I did enjoy actually having a truly live performance of Don't Stop Me Now by Queen during the credits, and you could even see them playing and everything. And then, of course, The Show Must Go On is the second song that played throughout the credits. And I feel like that could have been a better ending song, but I don't know what they were necessarily thinking at that point in the film or what was going through their minds. It just didn't feel like the best fit for my taste, I guess. Alright, I think it's gotten to that point since I've been talking forever now. Let's get to my personal rating, and my personal rating would probably be a 9.1, just because I am a super fan of Queen, I would argue. But yeah, I'm not going to give it a 9.1 though, because that's just my personal, I have a really big attachment to this film. I've been waiting almost a decade for this film to come out. But going into a critic's mindset, I'm going to give this film an 8.8. I do feel like it was lacking in some of the exposition especially, and I just feel like it could have benefited from that immensely, and it wouldn't have to ride just on the performances itself, even though these performances are absolutely incredible. But I do feel like the script was a little stale at some scenes in the movie, but besides that, I would have to say an 8.8 for sure. Go check this movie out if you can. I know it's playing in theaters almost everywhere. I know there's like 4,000 theaters in the US alone, so make sure you go check this movie out if you are a fan of any of Queen's music, whether it's We Will Rock You, We're the Champions, Bohemian Rhapsody, Killer Queen, Don't Stop Me Now, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, I don't think is actually in the movie, I don't remember. Oh wait, no, Brian does play it in the background a little bit. But I hope you guys enjoyed this movie review, since you guys seemed to want it actually, so I was kind of surprised by that. But yeah, I don't know if I'd be doing this in the future anymore, but we'll just have to wait and see. This movie in particular is just really something I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next ride.